He was laid out beneath the canopy of vibrant green and gold, each thread shimmering with the heraldry of House Tyrell. The pavilion walls rustled in a soft wind that carried the scent of roses mingled with the salt of the nearby sea. Renly Baratheon was dead, struck down on the eve of his greatest triumph. The man with the charismatic smile and the easy manner lay cold now, the laughter gone from his eyes. The gathered Tyrell banners drooped in the stillness of shock and grief. Loras Tyrell, his white armor smeared with tears and anger, stood silent, his gauntlet hands curled into fists. Marjorie, a vision of regal composure though her eyes burned with sorrow, placed a steadying hand on her brother's arm. Their father, Mace Tyrell, stood near them, face drawn but eyes calculating. They had staked everything on the union with Renly, his claim to the Iron Throne, their alliance sealed by Marjorie's marriage. Now, House Tyrell was unmoored, adrift on a sea of uncertainty. A hush fell when Lady Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns herself, stepped out of the shadows of the pavilion. Her sharp gaze swept over her assembled family and bannermen. Some said that in her youth, her scathing wit had toppled men far mightier than a king on a battlefield. Now, advanced in years but no less formidable, her mind raced through possibilities and potential alliances. House Tyrell prided itself on flowering brilliance, political cunning, martial strength, and fecund fields that fed half the realm. They did not intend to be undone by one tragic death in the night, no matter how devastating it was. Renly's supporters had scattered in the hours after dawn. Some had slunk away in the night, fearing the stories of dark magic or unstoppable foes. Others had turned their cloaks faster than the wind changed direction. The Rose could not follow them, for the Tyrell pride would never let them run. Besides, Mace Tyrell was not so easily spooked, nor was Lady Olenna. They had marched too far, spent too much, bound themselves too closely to this cause. They would not let the Lannisters at King's Landing swallow them, nor bend the knee to Stannis, who had arrived too late and vanished too soon. Whether it was truly a shadow that had slain Renly or some quiet, mundane treachery, none could say for certain. But he was gone. As the morning sun climbed higher, the Tyrell lords and ladies gathered, their faces somber, hearts weighed by grief, but also aflame with indignation. The Iron Throne still beckoned. Stannis marched on, proclaiming himself the rightful king. Joffrey, the Lannister boy, wore a crown in King's Landing, and Robb Stark, the king in the north, was more rumor than man to many of them, a young wolf prowling the wars in the Riverlands. Yet that rumor had grown more fearsome by the day. Robb Stark had broken the Lannister armies at Riverrun, captured Jaime Lannister, and gained the loyalty of the Riverlords. Indeed, while the realm was fractured, House Stark was not trifling prey. There were persistent whispers that they commanded the fierce loyalty of the entire North and had a rightful indignation at the Lannisters' slaughter of Ned Stark, their patriarch. Lady Olenna stood before her family and quietly announced that they must reconsider their alliances. The Baratheon cause had split in two, Stannis with his soldiers and ships on the one side, Renly's ghost on the other. Renly's cause was no longer a living force in the War of the Five Kings. They could seek to join with Stannis, albeit as a lesser partner now that their bridegroom was dead, or they could treat with the Lannisters and risk a humiliating acceptance of Joffrey's uncertain generosity. Or, she mused, they could cross yet another border entirely. The suggestion was at first shocking. House Stark was a northern power, an old name. The Tyrells of Highgarden traced their lineage to the stewards of the Reach who rose to lordship through the might of Aegon the Conqueror. The Reach had seldom allied with the North, their histories entwined only occasionally, and never with deep fondness. The two regions were separated by the breadth of the continent, each proud in its traditions. But these were strange times, and the young wolf had already proved he possessed a cunning beyond his years. Moreover, rumor spoke of the boy's sense of justice, of fairness, of holding honor above backroom bargains. That might be exactly the kind of king Lady Olenna could work with, or at the very least, manipulate to the Reach's advantage. Mace Tyrell expressed doubt. The man was ambitious and vain, yet not blind to practicalities. The Lannisters were closer, richer, and had the throne in their grasp. But Lady Olenna reminded him that the Lannisters would never forget how the Tyrells supported Renly against King Joffrey. They might offer safe passage today and a comfortable bed for Margaery, but who knew what tomorrow's dawn would bring once the Lannisters no longer needed Highgarden's armies and grain? It was Loras, still shell-shocked by Renly's death, who quietly said that he could not stomach joining the man who had ordered Ned Stark's execution. He had respected Eddard Stark as an honorable man, no matter the swirl of politics. The father of the North had possessed a dignity that Loras admired. The Lannisters had laughed at that dignity, mocking it even in King's Landing. Loras could not join them. Better, he said, to fight a war with a man who was at least honorable, if untested. Margaery listened, her usually tranquil face distant, as though her thoughts were drifting over the fields of Highgarden, over the marriage that had withered with Renly's demise, and into a future uncertain. She was young but no less ambitious than her family. She wanted to be queen. She had wanted to be Renly's queen, to stand at the pinnacle of power. Now that chance was gone. But the loss had not broken her. It was only a new puzzle, a new door. If there was some means to ensure the Tyrell name thrived, to position herself and her family in seats of power, she would find it. She regarded her grandmother, whose lips were pressed tight in a slight smile, as though relishing a new challenge. Their decision was made by midday. House Tyrell would abandon the Baratheon cause entirely, forsaking both Stannis and the dead Renly. They would ride north, or at least send emissaries to treat with the king in the north, seeking an alliance that would benefit them both. They had gold, ships, enough grain to feed entire kingdoms. The Tyrell cavalry was known to be unmatched, except perhaps by the Knights of the Vale, but the Vale remained strangely quiet behind Lysa Arryn's gates. The Starks needed allies. The Tyrells needed a rightful king who would welcome them rather than punish them for past missteps. If Robb Stark wanted to strengthen his cause, forging an alliance with Highgarden might be the surest path to consolidating southern support. And if Margaery were to wed the young king in the north, well, that was a possibility none would speak aloud yet, but it gleamed in Lady Olenna's sharp eyes. So it was that Lady Olenna prepared a small retinue for the journey. Mace Tyrell remained in camp with the bulk of the soldiers, uncertain of how the delicate negotiations would go. But Loras insisted on riding with his grandmother, for he would not be parted from the seat of a potential alliance that might avenge Renly's murder. Margaery followed as well, for her presence, her calm voice, and her budding legend of beauty and politeness might go a long way toward winning hearts. A score of knights and a few trusted courtiers trailed them. In secret, Lady Olenna sent raven messages to Robb Stark, requesting safe passage through the Riverlands, explaining that House Tyrell was prepared to discuss terms. It was a risk, of course. The message might be intercepted, or Robb Stark might refuse. But times were dire and demanded bold gambles. Days later, the Tyrell entourage set out, carefully avoiding King's Landing and the roads that might bring them too close to Lannister patrols. The small folk gaped at the sight of a small group bearing the gold rose of Highgarden traveling east. In the swirling chaos of the war, every traveler had a story, every rumor rung with possible truth. Yet the Tyrells were vigilant, led by knights who had served in many a tournament but also, more recently, in real battles. Their progress was slow, for the roads were in poor repair, and the land had been ravaged by roving armies. Smoke still curled from farmsteads as they passed, the devastation wrought by a war that many in the Reach had yet to taste. The hearts of Tyrell Knights grew heavy at these sights. They were used to the lush fields of home, the comfortable cheer of golden harvests, not the scorched earth and fearful faces of refugees. More than once they offered food from their own stores to starving families, aware that a hungry populace rarely favored the lords who let them starve. At last, they reached a place where they could leave a message for Robb Stark, carried by allied riverlords who had sworn themselves to the Tullus and, thus, to the king in the north. The king in the north responded swiftly. They were to meet near the ruins of an outlying estate a few leagues south of Riverrun, chosen for privacy and relative safety from Lannister outriders. The Tyrell party approached with caution. Lady Olenna led them, perched on a horse but looking none too comfortable upon it. Loras rode at her flank, face guarded, hands never far from the hilt of his sword. Margaery sat her saddle gracefully, scanning the horizon as they approached the meeting place. Robb Stark was waiting with a small guard. Beside him, the tall and formidable Great Jon Umber glowered suspiciously at the Southerners, though his face was less grim than curious. Roose Bolton stood off to the side, pale-eyed and silent, evaluating everything. Lady Catelyn Stark was present as well, urging caution, her features lined with the cares of war and personal loss. There were a few more. Edmure Tully, forging an air of confidence though war had weighed heavily on him. Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, stood quietly behind them, watchful as a hawk. The king himself looked younger than the Tyrells had expected. His face clean-shaven, but his presence proud. His direwolf, a gray and intimidating creature, circled behind the line of his men, sniffing at the ground, its ears alert. The Tyrell Knights stiffened at the sight of the beast, but Loras raised his chin, refusing to be daunted. These were the Northmen they had come to treat with, and fear was not an option. Lady Olenna began with a greeting, her tone crisp. She made no apology for House Tyrell's previous alignment, only stating the facts. That Renly Baratheon was dead, that Highgarden had no desire to become a vassal to the Lannisters or to a shadowbound Stannis. Robb Stark, she said, was rumored to be honorable, perhaps too honorable, if the stories of his father were to be believed. But the Tyrells had respect for men who kept their word, and they admired the loyalty the North seemed to bestow upon him. Could an alliance be possible between them? Robb Stark measured them, his expression grave. He answered with courtesy but made no promises. He had heard rumors that the Tyrells were fierce negotiators. Yet, if they were sincere in seeking friendship with the North, he saw no reason to spurn them. The war was far from won, and if the Tyrells brought the might of the Reach, its knights and especially its bountiful harvest, then the king in the North could feed his armies, reinforce his cavalry, and press a more decisive campaign against the Lannisters. House Stark, too, needed strategic gains, and forging ties with the second richest region in the Seven Kingdoms was no trivial feat. It was Catelyn Stark who, after hearing Lady Olenna's unvarnished honesty, realized the potential. The Tully host had marched with the Starks, but the Tully lands had been bled by conflict, and winter always came eventually. To hold out, the North and the Riverlands would need the agricultural wealth that only the Reach could reliably offer. The discussion grew more relaxed as they spoke at length, though neither side offered more than hints of deeper alliance. Each tested the other's sincerity. The Great Jon, never one for subtlety, blurted that the Tyrell Knights might find the winters in the North too cold for their liking, but Lady Olenna snapped back that with enough fur and wine, she could endure even the snows of Skagos if it meant forging a profitable alliance. By the end of that meeting, a tentative arrangement was made. House Tyrell would publicly renounce the Iron Throne's occupant, Joffrey Baratheon, as well as his uncle, Stannis. They would align themselves with Robb Stark and the North, providing hostages and eventually supplies. In return, House Stark would promise recognition of the Reach's borders and freedom from certain levies should the North succeed in its war for independence. Secretly, Catelyn Stark wondered if the Tyrells might seek a royal marriage alliance. She saw how Margaery's gaze occasionally settled upon Robb. The girl was beautiful in a gentle, rose-like way, yet Catelyn could also sense something steely behind her doe eyes. If Margaery became queen in the North, it would be an unprecedented union. But who was to say these were not times for unprecedented happenings? After the meeting, negotiations continued through letters and envoys. The Tyrell retinue remained encamped near Riverrun, mindful of not overstaying their welcome. Word spread quickly through the realm that House Tyrell was in talks with House Stark. Some lords in the Riverlands and the North welcomed the possibility, seeing at last a chance to close the supply gap. Others worried that the Tyrells would come with their own demands, sowing seeds of discord. Still, most recognized that the might of Highgarden would provide a powerful counterbalance to the Lannisters' hold on King's Landing. When finally the official pact was to be signed, Robb Stark took counsel with his mother, the Blackfish, and his bannermen. They concluded that forging a stronger tie with the Tyrells was indeed wise. The question remained how best to seal it. The Tyrells had been flexible about a formal betrothal. They had not pressed openly for it. They were too clever for that. But they let the possibility hover, like the scent of roses on a warm breeze. Robb Stark, for his part, was uncertain. He was already betrothed, by an oath made in haste, to a daughter of Walder Frey. Breaking that oath might bring the wrath of the Freys, a dangerous proposition. Yet the Tyrell alliance was arguably far more crucial to the war effort than any arrangement with the notoriously prickly Walder Frey. Robb had conferred with his closest confidants. Lady Catelyn approached him with caution, mindful that Eddard Stark had always taught their children to keep their word. But these were desperate times, and Walder Frey's support, while not inconsequential, paled in comparison to the entire might of the Reach. The mother in Catelyn's eyes saw the sense in uniting her son with a woman as clever and resourceful as Margaery Tyrell, especially one whose house had so many resources of its own. There was also a hint of kindness in Margaery's smile that Catelyn did not see in any of the Frey girls. Moreover, she suspected the girl's grandmother would keep her family's loyalty unwavering, so long as it served their interests. Ultimately, the decision was made, though it weighed heavily on Robb. He sent word to Walder Frey, explaining that circumstances had forced him to reconsider the arrangement. He attempted to soften the blow with promises of new alliances, titles, or privileges for House Frey. Yet the old man's reply was frosty in the extreme, hinting of future retribution. While the king in the North's men muttered in private that they had just made a dangerous enemy, the course was set. The Tyrells would have their royal wedding, and the North would have its alliance. With each passing day, the newly forged bond between House Stark and House Tyrell strengthened. Caravans began to flow, grain, salted meats, and barrels of Arbor gold wine for the northern forces. The Tyrell cavalry joined the Stark outriders in patrolling the riverlands, driving out Lannister foragers or forcing them to retreat. Soon, local folk who had suffered under the Lannister raids began to speak with hope again. Lord Tywin Lannister, it was said, seethed at the news that Highgarden was now aiding the Starks. That alone gave a renewed sense of purpose to Robb's war effort. The day finally arrived for the official betrothal ceremony between Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell. It took place at Riverrun, in the presence of the Lords of the North, the Riverlands, and representatives from the Reach. The Great John led a roaring toast to the king in the North's new bride, though Lady Olenna did not look entirely pleased by the man's boisterous manner. Edmure Tully fussed over the details, wanting to show the Tyrells the best hospitality the embattled castle could offer. Margaery herself wore a gown of pale green with gold thread, modest but elegant, her hair braided with small golden roses. She showed none of the heartbreak one might expect from a woman who had lost her first husband mere weeks before. If she mourned Renly, she kept that sorrow tucked away. This day was about forging a new destiny, one that might still lead her to a crown. When Robb took her hand and spoke his vow, he tried to keep his voice strong. He was unused to the politicking that came so easily to some. Only a year ago, he had been at Winterfell, a boy lording over his father's holdfast with no notion of the storms to come. The war had hardened him, forced him to make decisions quickly. Yet standing here, watching Margaery's serene face as she pledged herself in turn, he felt the weight of responsibility doubling. This was not only a marriage but a statement to the entire realm. The North and the Reach stood united. Beneath the eyes of the old gods and the new, they clasped hands. The cheers that erupted in the great hall were thunderous, though Lady Olenna's was more of a prim smile than a roar. From that day onward, life moved quickly. Margaery settled into the Stark camp with quiet grace, bringing with her a bevy of Reach retainers and ladies-in-waiting. She soon charmed the northern lords with her thoughtful questions about their families and traditions, and her easy willingness to adapt to more austere surroundings. She listened respectfully when one knight told her the history of the Night's Watch. She inquired about the direwolves and seemed fascinated by their near-mythic symbolism. Margaery understood how to use courtesy as a weapon, something that might not seem threatening at first but could win hearts more effectively than steel.